Resident Evil Revelations 2 is a third-person survival horror game where you play as Claire Redfield and Barry Burton, with the goal of solving the mystery of a strange island Claire is kidnapped and brought to. The game is available on PlayStation 3, 4 and Vita, Xbox 360 and Xbox One, Steam, and the Nintendo Switch. Atmosphere. The game is split into Barry and Claire's campaign. They take place 6 months apart, with the two veteran characters being accompanied by partners they are AI controlled when you're not playing as them. The two-player aspect does limit how creepy the game can feel. There's very little in the way of isolation, since your partner is always running around on screen or commenting on things. The AI in general seems particularly unaware of certain situations and can contribute quite often to the immersion breaking. It's never very strong, but the game's atmosphere really varies from location to location. It's generally dark and vaguely spooky. Dreary outdoor environments, derelict factories, and run-down towns. The bloodworks are about as nasty as the game gets, with the large majority of it being forests and industrial areas. The whole game is set in a hastily constructed colony on a shoestring budget. Still, the game manages a mild tension that it maintains as you walk through the environments, waiting for the next enemy encounter. What tends to make the atmosphere take the back seat is mostly things like the AI behaving strangely, which is more of an immersion problem. There are lots of parts of the game where it becomes a bit tedious to have to complete puzzles by switching characters over and over. Overall, the game's atmosphere is present. It has some moments, but it's never really allowed to truly take over simply because of the gameplay, be it combat or puzzle solving. It's only in those brief moments where you feel truly alone does the atmosphere really shine. That's one Harry Mason. Scares. Seeing Resident Evil return to zombies for this game was pretty endearing, but between them and the monsters you fight in Claire's campaign, there's more frustration in the combat than there is fear, with a lot of mechanics introduced to make taking care of them more difficult. Barry's campaign has enemies with a secret weak spot that can only be detected by switching to Natalia, his partner, and she can detect invisible enemies too. They are by far the most frightening things in the game, since figuring out where they are before they touch you is a challenge, as well as Barry's campaign having the constant struggle between having to shoot very specific things you can't see and trying to conserve ammo. Where the frustration sets in is how the invisible enemies can instantly kill you if you get too close. There's not really much else the game tries to do but use the combat as a way to frighten the player that doesn't really work particularly well, with the large majority of enemies being fairly easy to deal with very few exceptions. That's still one Harry Mason. Sound design. As per usual for Resident Evil, the sound design is pretty immaculate, with loads of great cinematic pieces with some returning from Revelations 1. Lots of chilling string pieces, haunting pianos, and other thudding orchestral and synthetic dread-soaked tracks. The music stands out on its own very rarely when it's in the game, and doesn't really have any notable tracks, but it's a stretch to say that any of it is actually bad. It's just not as iconic. The gun sound effects and flesh impacts are pretty realistic sounding, as it is with most of the effects in the game. The gore sounds again never fail to deliver. The game's voice acting for characters like Claire seem a little unenthusiastic, but Moira, Barry, and especially Alex really deliver in the game. The sound space and reverb are really accurate. To be honest, there's not much to really talk about in the game's sound design. It's pretty much the epitome of competent. Nothing stands out as bad, but nothing really excels either. It does exactly what you expect it to do without fail. Gore. There's a lot of gore in the game, with things like decaying corpses walking around presenting the gnarliest zombies since Resident Evil 3, as well as some pretty wild transformation scenes and the monsters covered in patchwork strips of flesh, or in Barry's campaign, their skin seems to totally dissolve as they grab him. It's disturbingly viscous. There's also the meat processing plant and a new bleeding status that has blood pouring down the screen, which can be a bit annoying. Overall, the gore is plentiful and pretty damn awesome to see. That's 3 Harry Masons. Story. At a TerraSave conference, Claire Redfield and Moira Burton are attacked by mysterious men and awaken on a prison island in the middle of nowhere. Following the trail of his missing daughter, Barry Burton arrives on the island 6 months later to try and find her. The game's story is obviously split between the past and the present, and the chapters introduce new scenarios and characters, and some have their entire arcs take place in single chapters. The story ended up being a surprising highlight that started off a little cliche but ended up really interesting. There are a lot of great diary entries written by characters you experience changing between the gap in Barry and Claire's campaign, and that's a recurring theme of the time gap. Things change. But the game has a lot of tricks up its sleeve for surprising and engaging story elements that, whilst it didn't always utilize them, with characters being introduced and written off in the same chapter, it was still fun to follow along. There are a lot of things that get set up in this game that Capcom hasn't decided to follow up on yet, which is a shame, since a lot of it ended being kind of out of the park for a Resident Evil game. Making the final score 4 out of 5 Harry Masons. Whilst some part of the games were bogged down by the game's forced partner, there was a lot of fun to be had in Revelations 2. Again, I'd like to remind you the whole thing is down to my opinion in horror games, and if you don't share this opinion, then that's cool, I get it. I'd like to point out that whilst I made it off the island, I didn't forget about Natalia, and I advise you don't either. There'll be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. Always go check out Bumps in the Middle of the Night. Peace.